If you don't want to be live, just turn off the camera. So again, hello again for our session today, Lunch and Learn, life hacking method, adapting LSP to fit new concepts. With me today is Liam. Liam is located in the UK. Obviously, he doesn't speak German, or at least hasn't spoken to me in German yet. And we are just on our own. Usually we have a moderator, but we do this on our own today. As normal, we will have like a two-way conversation, but it's not meant to be like that. It is actually that you're completely happy and free to put on any questions live in the chat window, or just shout it out whenever you have a question. So please feel free just to ask questions. We don't want to have a dialogue between us. Liam and I know each other well, so I know what he's doing. But this is more about you to learn more and to really know how to adapt the LSP method to fit new concepts. Liam, over to you. Maybe you can introduce yourself quickly and say who are you and why are you?
Yeah, great. So my name's Liam. I'm first and foremost, I'm a teacher. So I currently teach at a quite prestigious independent school in the UK. Previously, I've taught in international schools for the last 10 years. So I've been in Singapore and Paris. So yeah, I am by trade very much diehard educator. In terms of my relationship with LEGO Serious Play, 3 years ago during lockdown, I was kind of cruising around to nowhere around Singapore on one of those boats that didn't actually have an end destination, and decided to enroll on a training course, so an online LEGO Serious Play course, and it's something I'd always wanted to do, I'd always been interested to do, and from there really I got very excited about the potential applications of LEGO Serious Play, specifically in education for me. That's my context. Quickly became aware that the way that I had been taught to use LEGO Serious Play through the course, although it was a great training course and I took a lot from it, it wasn't really fit for purpose. The constraints of a school and of being a learning organization meant that as I was taught to use LEGO Serious Play, there was some things that needed to change to make it work as a tool to support learning. So basically, I've been on a bit of a quest really for 3 years, just hacking and breaking and rebuilding and kind of taking the method apart and putting it back together to fit it for the context within which I work, which is education. So yeah, that's a brief synopsis. Hopefully that will suffice for the first question.
You've got some examples for us how you tweak and twist the method for us. So maybe I introduce myself first, really, because we always have new visitors and new viewers. My name is Jens. Sven and Jörg also work. So I am lead trainer for Serious Work on the LEGO Serious Play method in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I've been trained, I think, 2015 in the first round with a different training organization, and was so fascinated, taken by LEGO Serious Play that I put it in my profession and translated this book here in German. And I'm co-inventor of LEGO Serious Play Online. Maybe a nice coincidence, because otherwise Liam wouldn't be here with us today. And also translator of Mastering LEGO Serious Play 44 Facilitation Techniques, also into German. And Liam, just a little spoiler, has just finished his new book in education, and it will be published next week in English, and I'm going to translate it. LEGO Serious Play is one of my key methods. So it's the preferred weapon of choice, I'd say, but it's not always the right method. So I also use Lego, use Playmobil Pro. I use different gamification tools whenever I can reach people. I love gamification. I like to involve people, to bring people on the table and bring them action-based, bring them on to get them off the chairs, to reflect and to learn, so that they can gain new new experience and new ways of adapting to changing environments. That's why I'm actually here and love Lego Serious Play. Liam, let's just maybe say, what is Lego Serious Play for you? Because we always have some people who don't know what Lego Serious Play is. So maybe you go and the challenge, what is Lego Serious Play? And I might just jump in and I may just support you.
Yeah, great. I mean, so Lego Serious Play, I guess, it's an kind of natural evolution for me. I've always played with Lego growing up, and then as an educator, I've always translated the use of Lego into my teaching. So way before I was trained and certified in Lego Serious Play, I was using Lego in what I consider to be fairly novel ways to bring concepts to life. I'm a design and technology teacher, and I also teach engineering as well. So for me, Lego was always a great way of rapid prototyping, visualizing. I taught drawing techniques through Lego. Sorry, we animated, we created stop motion animation. So Lego has always been part of my practice. I guess what Lego Serious Play does, the different dimension it's brought to my teaching and learning is there is a much more significant focus on the meaning of blocks. So the notion of the bricks becoming less literal and becoming more an abstract representation of an idea really is what has added huge value to what I do. And as soon as I kind of developed that, there you go, brick as metaphor, there you go. As soon as I developed that understanding, really it was like a kind of opening of Pandora's box, if you like. There were so many different applications that I suddenly became aware of, and so many different contexts where I really able to bring meaning and bring value and add value to my student experience. So yeah, that's really what it is for me. It's the building on what I've always loved about Lego and adding a deeper sense of meaning to communicate more complex ideas as well.
Maybe I can just add on something to that as maybe a more technical definition of Lego Serious Play. It is using, of course, Lego bricks like this one, white Duplo brick, but also different bricks, specially selected bricks, and assigning meaning to that. So using metaphors to tell stories, and it follows a strict framework of build question, which has been posed by a facilitator. Everyone sharing the ideas. So building models first, building the answers using Lego models, and then sharing these ideas and then reflecting. And I think the most powerful part is actually the build part and the reflecting part, where actually the knowledge comes, the real more, but the juice, I think, comes out of the lemon, what I say. So this is more the technical stuff. And yeah, it uses, of course, specifically assigned Lego bricks. It doesn't work with your police station and your fire station that you can build in a Lego store. It's really have to be meaningless bricks, I'd say, if I can put it this way. Liam, I think we have briefly touched it. You were on a boat, you are in a school context. But why the idea of adopting the ideas? The way we teach it, I think we teach it quite long. We have the 45-minute skills build, even online. We have the 60-minute skills build, the online skills build techniques. We do the shared model building online, so it's different. So basically, the process takes 1.5 hours from individual build level 1 to a shared model build. But I guess when you have 45 minutes of lectures, at least we have 45 minutes in Germany, and you have 90 minutes, and you put a skills build on top, you exceed your hours, right? So why actually tweaking and adopting the method?
Yeah, so I think in terms of tweaking there, I mean, to go back to the original question of the whole session, like applying things to new contexts, I think like with everything, context is key, right? And I think within the school context, you obviously have some significant constraints that you might not have in a typical workshop environment. So one of those, as you mentioned, is time. And I think when I first addressed the constraint of time, there were two things. One was you can take one view of it and say, well, actually, we don't have time to do a workshop, and therefore, how can you do it? Or you can take another view of it and think about the opportunity cost, you know, kind of what opportunities exist within a school context that don't exist within a workshop context. So
basically
I
saying
think
like online, basically people say don't do it, but people still want to work together, and we have to find a way to actually work together and share meaning.
yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're in, I mean, in my particular context with schools, what you lose, you can't get kids for 6 hours straight. You'll never get that. School timetables are too packed, they're too busy, you're just not going to get it. But what you do get is kids every week. So I might see kids the same time each week for an hour. Now, that doesn't lend itself to the perfect workshop, but what it does lend itself to is if you're able to take the method apart and reimagine it in a way that actually builds on that time frame as a strength, then I think you can add incredible value to the kind of framework that I was taught. So one of the advantages of having short blocks of time is the reflection period, for example, doesn't have to be a 5-10 minute conversation at the end of a build. What I'll often do with students is they might do that kind of short reflection, but then, you know, I might see kids a week later in some cases. So I have a week to get them to go away and think more deeply and meaningfully about some of the themes that they might have unpacked. So if we're talking about sustainability and we're building models, exploring things like the circular economy, then at the end of an individual build, kids will go away with a certain idea of what they think that means. But then I can share case studies, I can share, you know, like any good teacher will, I can share other materials that might build on that initial level of understanding, so that when they come back the next week for their shared build, they can revisit their individual models. They can start to appreciate how some of their ideas are very strong and how perhaps some of their ideas are actually quite weak and might need to be addressed. They can start to address some of the misconceptions themselves. So that time in between sessions that something like a rigid school timetable allows, I consider to be actually a massive opportunity as opposed to limitation. So I think regardless of your context, mine happens to be education, but I think regardless of what context you're looking at introducing Lego Serious Play into, I think looking at the constraints that exist and then trying to innovate within the parameters of those constraints, I think is the key really to being successful.
Well, I don't know. I know if you are familiar with Lego Serious Play. Many of you might not out there, but when we start with Lego Serious Play, we don't just put bricks on the table and ask people to build something and tell something about them. So because we would basically ask people to tell a story, and they haven't learned to use the bricks before, because we have to take every person into account. Maybe people who are extrovert able to do this, introvert people are maybe not able to just use bricks, might sit in front and say, what should I do now? And the skills build usually takes about 45 minutes if you do it properly in a regular workshop setting. But that would be fill your timetable completely. How have you managed this challenge? How did you manage?
Yeah, again, I think context is everything. I take the view I play the long game. So I'm not introducing Lego Serious Play as something that I'll run one workshop with students for. I use it across maybe an 8-week unit of study. And then I might use it again in another unit of study. And then we might use it again in a workshop that might be focusing on, I don't know, social media well-being, whatever it might be. So I actually I tend to devote a whole lesson, like a 60-minute block. We have 60-minute lessons. I will devote a whole lesson to just learning how to use the method. So I always give students a 60-minute session on, okay, this is Lego Serious Play, these are the big ideas. And at the end of that, it might be kind of, it won't necessarily deal with the content that we're going to be covering across the course of the next 8 weeks, because what I don't want students to do when they're learning about the method, I don't want them to be so focused on the knowledge and content they're trying to explore to then not focus on how to use the method. So I tend to use some quite everyday things. So if I'm getting them to do an individual build, I'll try to think of something that they all have experience in. So it might be something like friendship, and I might get them to build a model to show what their best friend looks like, because every student can access that without needing to worry about whether or not they know what they're talking about. So I do still devote probably an hour to actually teaching people how to use the method. The advantage then is that's done and dusted for me forever. Like I don't then need I can use Lego Serious Play with students for like 2 years and never have to go back to fundamentals, and we can use it again and again and again and again. And that's really the advantage of my particular context, I suppose.
And I think you've shown us something last year when we met, that you actually put some bricks on the table and you have some slides on the table. So instead of building the tower, which is the general build question, a technical skills build, you do something different. What do you do?
Yeah, so I have a couple of options. So the first iteration of this, because for me to go through the kind of pragmatic steps of leading the skills build took way too much time if you were using it in a lesson. So what I did is when students come into a lesson, I have something called Build Me cards, and it's basically images of some different models that might stretch people to use different blocks. So when they come in, I have a slide on the board that says, take a seat, pick a Build Me card, see if you can build it. So obviously I'm working with students who are typically 18 or under. Most of them have a pretty good grasp of Lego. So I'm not really worried about whether they've ever seen it before. So giving them little challenges is actually quite a nice way to engage them instantly at a session. One of the things I've started to do recently to kind of develop that is I've created what I call can you cards. So with a can you card, instead of just having an image of something to build, I have something a little bit more challenging. So every student gets a different can you card. So it might be, can you build a functioning windmill that can spin? Can you build an emotion? Can you build a working set of gears? Can you build a bridge that connects using only minifigure parts? So those can you cards, they allow everyone to have their own kind of little individual challenge. They're always, I would say, set at just about the right level. So they're just about challenging enough that it's not obvious, but it's not so hard that you can't do it in 2-3 minutes. And the other nice thing then is at the end, I just get everyone to say, okay, just have a look around the room. What have people done? Look around the table. How have they used bricks differently to do this? So those can you cards I found really useful. And then with groups that I've worked with over several weeks, I developed that idea. So the initial can you cards might be all individual challenges. The one I did just last week with a group was, can you build, what was it? Can you build a model of a car that can travel across the table without being pushed? So I got them to do that as a group. And that was really interesting because it challenged them in terms of actually how do you engage in that? That's actually quite a tricky problem to solve. Some people are really smart and they realize that it says push, not pull. So they just put a rope on it and pull it endlessly and look really smug. Some people end up building these really kind of complex contraptions where there's these big ramps that they fall down. Some people just have towers that they kind of pull a block from, the whole thing collapses and the car hopefully goes across the table. But these types of different challenges at the start of a workshop, I find, are really engaging, and they don't require a very formulaic, perhaps slower approach to the skills build.
Mm-hmm. Tama put a question in the chat window. Liam, do you have an example? What topic have you already dealt with in educational context? That was one of my questions as well. So maybe you have some examples for us that you can share.
Yeah, of course. Just let me try and share my screen quickly. I've got a few, so I put together a few slides, so apologies if these aren't relevant. I'll try and share my screen now. Just trying to do that. Here we go. The beauties of working in a school is the Wi-Fi is never what you would consider to be outstanding. So can you see my screen?
Not yet, but it's starting.
Lovely. So hopefully something is sharing. Yes, no?
No, not yet, but what should we see? Or just email it to me and I'll open it for you.
Okay, I will. It tells me it's trying to load, so let me drop it to you in the chat window and then you can fire it across. Sorry, I'm going to say
Ah,
the beauty of...
here it is. Here it is.
Oh, you can see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of examples, I can, if you want, would it be useful just to float through a few things, the way that I've used it in schools, or do you want, is there something specific that you want me to try and dig out? Got a few slides here, so.
Maybe if you want to just share whatever you want to.
Okay, so examples of things I've done. This is one thing I do quite a lot. Sorry, so these are called snapshots. So one of the things, because we are inherently learning focused, and because there can often be quite a lot of time between lessons, one of the things that I encourage students to do quite regularly is to create snapshots of learning. So this is basically annotations over the top of models. We use something called sketchnoting, a mixture of images and text. And what this allows students to do is to capture their thinking at that point in time. What I then do is things called bookend reflections. So students will do this type of exercise at the beginning of a unit, and then they'll do it again at the end of a unit. And what's really nice there is they have a visual comparison of what learning has actually taken place. And they can actually see how their own ideas, perceptions, thoughts has changed as a result of the learning that's been going on in that unit. So here's one example of things we do. In terms of what you can see here, what is success? This is something I run with university counselors and students who are picking what university they're going to go to. So to help them understand where the best fit for them is, we try to help them understand what it means to be successful. Often students are driven by parents. And what we try to do is to get them to step away, ignore parents and peer pressure, and understand what success looks like for them personally, and then use that to inform their decisions. On the right-hand side here in the middle, this is a workshop on sustainability. So this is a first lesson on what sustainable design is. So students are exploring sustainable design, their initial ideas through their models. Top right-hand corner is about inclusive school environments. So this was a focus group on what does an inclusive school look like compared to what might be the status quo where they think it's not so much. And the bottom right-hand here side is another focus group activity I ran with middle school students on their relationship with social media. So we got kids to explore what the positives and negative impacts on their lives and well-being were related to their interactions with social media.
I think that one I like. I think that is one you explained us, you showed us, that you had two groups building a positive and a negative side, and then you had like a different approach to shared model build. You want to share?
That's right, yeah. So if I'll jump again to something else that will make sense of that. So this idea here. So one of the things I do quite regularly is something called rainbow groups. So I don't know how you feel Lego Serious Play workshops go, but if you get to a point where you're all sharing shared models, but you all have the same build question, by the time you get to like the third shared model, people are kind of like, okay, yeah, most of the ideas are the same. Is there, there might be some differences, but there's a lot of repetition. So people end up saying things like, this is similar to the last model, but. So one thing I've tried to do is to mix that up a bit. So I've created something called rainbow groups, or rainbow builds. So this is where you'll give each group a different question, different scenario, or different stimulus, so that when the shared builds come, it'll all be around the same topic or the same theme, but when then the shared builds come in, the stories are very different. So an example might be to give one group a scenario where you're looking to the future and it's perfect, and you give one group a scenario where you look to the future and it's a disaster. So you get them to build in response to those two different scenarios. So it adds value because they're both looking at the same themes, the same ideas, but they're projecting in a different context, and it makes the story inherently more interesting. I've done this with students looking at sustainability, and I'll give them different products as a starting point. So one of the things I like to do is put non-Lego elements in the middle of a shared build. So if they're looking at sustainability, each student will get a different product, and then they will build their life cycle analysis or whatever it might be that I'm getting them to focus on around that specific product. So again, the builds, although they're dealing with the same themes and ideas, the content and the nature of the story will be different. So yeah, that I really enjoy that. And I like giving different questions. I like splitting questions, giving some people only the opportunity to focus on the positive, some students only the opportunity to focus on the negative, because people will inherently want to do one or the other. and that will dominate their thinking. So if you give one group one group the other, and then you bring them together in the shared build, they can still add their positive if they were negative before, but it gets them to have a forced perspective, which I think is quite useful depending on the exercise, obviously.
Anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, of course. Let's see what else I've got.
I'd love the little 1.5. That is something I personally like.
Okay, so build level 1.5. Yeah, so this was born again from the constraint of time. So I found that in a lesson, I had enough time to run an individual build, but I didn't quite have enough time to run an individual build and a shared build. So to try and counter that and create a situation where at the end of a lesson, students could still come together and create some form of shared model, I kind of put together an idea that I like to call build level 1.5.
Yeah. Let me maybe just, sorry for interrupting, let me maybe just
of course, go, yeah.
The concept of the build levels. I don't know if everyone can see that. I can see myself. So you have the individual model here. That means building individual models of yourself, like 3D models of your thoughts, so that everyone can see them and touch them and ask them. And then we have a shared model, which is basically bringing those together for shared meaning, topics of a shared interest, common interest. And then we have build level 3s, which is systems models we have not covered here, I think. So, and build level 1.5 is something, a twist that Liam has made.
Yeah, so it's trying to bridge that divide really, because shared builds obviously take quite a long time to actually put something together on a base plate. And if you want to capture ideas quite quickly at the end of an individual build and you've got time as a limiting factor, I don't always have the luxury of being able to do that with students. So build level 1.5, it takes, let me go back here, it takes the idea of using different frameworks, like frameworks which teachers will probably be quite familiar with, if I'm being brutally honest, things like Diamond 9, a spectrum, matrices. You use a framework which allows people to take their individual components of their models. So their individual models, they can take them apart, and then they can build a shared model using an existing framework. So this one, for example, the Diamond 9, that's a way of ranking different ideas. So what I get students to do here is they build their individual model. I get them to break their individual model apart into the different elements. And then I say, okay, as a group, let's put all of your elements into the mix. Which ones are the most important? Which ones are the least important? So they end up with a shared model of sorts in that they have to come to a shared understanding of what the most important ideas are, but they're not necessarily worried about how to connect them. They're not going through that kind of build cycle of adding more things to the plate as well. So it's, from a purist perspective, it's not really a build level 2 in that it's not a shared model, but it is a socializing of knowledge and coming to consensus over where certain ideas should sit in the greater context of whatever challenge I've given them. I find this incredibly effective. And it also, it's a great way to start things like meta model building and shared building, because it gets people to actually go through the process of organizing their thinking and ideas before they then go and try and put that into a shared model. So I will often do this exercise anyway, even if I am going to do a shared build, and say, okay, so those are your top 5 as a table. I want you now to split up amongst the other tables with those top 5 ideas. So you're all using your kind of premier ideas to start your shared build.
Mm-hmm. Any questions from the audience? So if you have any question, please just write them in the chat window or maybe just shout out now. Okay, no questions so far. Liam, I think you're brilliant.
That's all right.
What benefits do you see using Lego Serious Play in education?
So I think there's a few. I think playful learning or play-based learning is massively in vogue right now. So one of the things that using Lego bricks to help develop meaningful learning experiences is it taps into that inherent kind of human desire to play and construct the world around them. So in that respect, from a purely kind of pedagogical learning perspective, there is so much value to actually having to explicitly communicate your ideas and thinking through a physical model. One of the biggest challenges in most school contexts, you have kind of hierarchies within a classroom. You mentioned earlier the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. So extroverts tend to dominate classrooms, introverts tend to sit back quite happily and let the classroom be dominated by someone else. What this does is it creates an environment where, regardless of your kind of approach, you're given an equitable opportunity to contribute. Now, what that means is every learner will benefit from every learner being able to contribute, because you're socializing so much more knowledge. You're making explicit so many more ideas that would otherwise kind of sit at the back of a room. So in doing so, people can actually bounce ideas off people who they might otherwise not actually bounce ideas off. The other huge advantage of using the model to communicate things is you have this kind of, we've observed this kind of decoupling effect. So popular kids, their ideas tend to be popular. Unpopular kids, their ideas might not be as popular in a classroom setting. What you have when you focus on models, and especially when those models start to be jumbled up, it's less about who says it, and it's more about the quality of the idea itself. So you're starting to break down these kind of social hierarchies that can have quite a damaging impact on a kind of typical classroom environment. The other thing that I think is absolutely amazing is, because you build initially, you can give students the opportunity to build in silence, and you can get them to build without worrying about how to communicate the idea. They're not worrying about what they're saying. They're just literally focusing on building the ideas, reflections, and thinking that they have. Now, that's amazing in two ways. One, if you have learners who are, let's say, learning in a different language, or you have learners who might have an educational need, they might be petrified to try and articulate their thinking purely through words, because if they're using their second language, for example, they might be so focused on what they're saying, the value of their ideas might be lost. This gives them a framework around which to articulate their thinking when they share their model stories. The other thing with building models is it allows you to articulate what we call tacit learning. So the example I use, in my book, I've written about this, and the example I use is everyone has an understanding of what love is. For example, we all think we know what love is, but if someone asks you to say, well, what is it? It can actually be quite challenging to say what it is. People tend to say who they love, or what they love, without actually focusing on the emotion itself. So what this process does is it forces people to think really hard and articulate what we call tacit knowledge. So knowledge that would otherwise remain kind of hidden. It's all experiential, and it's difficult for other people to benefit from that because you can't articulate it very easily. So what I find is this makes it easy to articulate that knowledge, or easier at least. And in doing so, it allows other people to learn from other people's experiences, which, I mean, ultimately that really is what education is all about. It's socializing what you experience, what you know, what you've learned, what you think you know, and then talking to other people about that and using other people's experiences and knowledge to inform your own. And it's a beautiful method for that. It really is.
Thank you. Tamar just asked, how old is your target group in the field of education?
Okay, yeah. So I work in a secondary school context, so students who are 11 to 18, typically. I do a lot of work with adult learners as well, so school administration teams, counsellors, all sorts, essentially. If you can think of a context around school, I've worked with parents, governors. If you can think of a group who would be associated with education, I've worked with them, but primarily 11 to 18. In writing the book, I've been in contact with a lot of people doing this work at university. And I've also spoken and included case studies in the book from people who are working in the primary school sector as well. So there are teachers and educators using this with 7-year-olds to really, really good effect. What's interesting in all of those contexts is that in every single one of them, the nature of the system, the nature of the method is changed. Like, if I'm changing it for my context, then how I've seen it used for a primary school context, it's changed again to make it age appropriate for that group of learners as well, and for the school environment, the learning environment within which they're working too.
what challenges do you see, or what challenges have you occurred? So by your students, by the parents, maybe by authorities?
I mean, I'll be honest, it's challenges, there's not that many yet, to be brutally honest. Whenever I use it, it's incredibly popular. There is something about its use in schools which appeals to students because it's not typical. Maybe if it was used in every lesson, people would find that slightly different. And I do think it shouldn't be used in every lesson. But there's a novelty to it. There's a playful element to it, which when you compare it to a kind of chalk and talk classic lesson, they're incomparable. Teachers, generally speaking, are very positive because they see the potential applications in relevant contexts. I've written articles for all sorts of journals associated with the two schools that I've worked at because they're looking to actively advocate and promote the process as being used in their school because they see it as a huge USP and a value adder. One of the pragmatic challenges, I think we were talking earlier about constraints, obviously working with children is different to working with adults. You don't get perhaps the patience and you don't get perhaps the constant focus, or maybe not, they're not subtle when they're not focused, shall we say. So if someone finds it boring and they're 13, they'll tell you. Whereas if someone finds it boring and they're 30, they might sit on their phone under the table. You know, there's a subtle difference there. So one of the ways that I've tried to counter that is I bring a huge amount of gamification into the sessions. So, you know, spinning wheels, metaphor roulette, lots of kind of digital tools as well that I'll drop into sessions to make quizzes and things like that. It's a lot more varied, perhaps.
And you do allow cell phones, mobile phones in your lessons? Right?
No. So we're very fortunate that we are a school that is a devices, one-to-one devices school. So every student has a device, but the only time I will let them use them is when they're doing snapshots. Okay. So when they take photos and they're annotating over the top, I'll allow them to use devices then, but I absolutely wouldn't allow devices on the table when they're building. It's just
when you do the quizzes, but you do some quizzes, then you allow them because
yeah. If I do, I'll let them, if we're doing something like a Kahoot or something along those lines, then I'll allow them to use them then. And then I'll just say, okay, pop them to the side normally, or pop them in your bag. And they're pretty good at it because once they're stood up and building blocks, they actually don't want to jump onto their phone. The reason they normally want to go on there is because they're looking for a distraction.
Yeah, that's right. Jessica is asking, does LSP work for big groups like school classes? I thought it's limited to like 10 people per group.
I've used it with huge groups. So I use it, using it with classes is very, very simple. I find, so typically my classes range between 12 and 28. And I will use them with those quite happily. I've run it with whole year groups. So I ran a session on transitions with a group of 84 students. One of the things I did with those groups, so with the really big groups, so in classes, I just do it myself. If I have a really big group, I'll normally rope in what I call kind of helpers. So it might be teachers who are timetabled to teach them at that time, or house mistresses, because we're also a boarding school. And what I tend to do is just walk them through the session beforehand. And I don't train them because they don't need training to just kind of keep the peace. But what I'll do is give them little cards that have maybe the key points to look out for in the build phase and reflection phase. So maybe some kind of prompt cards, if you like. And that just allows them to become facilitators as well. I also liked it. So with classes, another thing that I will regularly do is I will kind of devolve leadership to the students. So recapping is one of the challenges with big groups, right? So I print off, I've created these kind of little recap master cards. And the kids love it because if I give someone a recap master card, it's like a bit like a get out of jail free in Monopoly. You can play it at any time and you have to give it to someone else at the table. And when you give it to them, they have to recap the whole story. So
say again what is the story, yeah?
Yeah, so they have the power to like get one over on their friend and make them recap it. But in doing so, they hand over that power. So as you get to really complex stories, that can become quite amusing. Okay. But I tend to give quite a lot of role cards. So I might give Connection Master, someone who's focused explicitly on looking at the connections in a shared build. So that's the person who's always asking, okay, well, how does that link to the other elements of the model whenever something is placed down? So it gives different people different focuses. And I think devolving that leadership allows you to work with bigger groups because you're not solely reliant on the facilitator then to go around and be the person who's moderating and facilitating. You're basically creating lots of satellite micro facilitators in a big room.
And I can tell from experience from standard workshop that I have facilitated 280 people, it works. Questions are just dropping in. Sylvia, how do you start follow-up sessions? Do you have a method to check-ins, or do you just start working on where you stopped in the last session? So many questions.
It's a great question. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go first?
No, Sylvia first.
So I actually have one. I have one of those follow-up sessions that's going to start in about 15 minutes. And what I'm doing is at the end of the last lesson, I got them to record the videos of their stories. We'll start this next lesson with a big screening. I will play the 3 videos. They're quite short. They're only like 2-3 minutes each. So we will play those. And what I will do in that is I'm going to use something called Mentimeter, which is like an online interactive group engagement tool. So I'll get people to reflect on their thoughts and feelings about those stories in live time. And then at the end of that, we'll create a kind of word cloud of, okay, it's on the future of education. So we'll create this kind of bubble of terms and phrases that relate to how people feel about the future of education they built last week. So I will often use something like that. If it's a small group, I think I did this with you, Jens, when I last met you. I do Kahoots. So I take photos of different parts of the models. If you haven't used Kahoot before, it's a very child-friendly online quiz tool, but it works equally well with adult learners. Take photos of different parts of the model, and you can basically create multiple choice options. So what I tend to do is put 4 different options and say, okay, what did this bit mean? And then you can have a bit of a laugh because it creates a ranking table. So you can find out who was really listening and tease the people who weren't in a very productive and constructive way. So I will do things like that, little recaps. Sometimes I'll kick off with a skills build, but just one activity. So I mentioned earlier those can you cards. If I'd done can you cards with individual builds the week before, I might do a group one to change it up the week after. Just anything really to frame them back into to kind of just touch them back with what they did in the last session, just to bring that thinking back to the session that they were previously involved in.
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
I put the Kahoot link in the chat window. I've got 3 questions. It might be a bit challenging, though. You are on a well-known UK public school, private school, one of the best known, renowned schools. Do you think that would also work in private schools, public schools, sorry, on the public school sector? And I was thinking of the German school sector, it might be maybe a bit limited. Do you think that would work and fit in a regular schedule?
My experience is it would work better. I don't know what German private schools are like, but we call them public schools. I know it's very confusing, but independent schools in the UK are typically, kids are more reserved. Kids are quieter. Kids expect to sit down in a very traditional context and be taught to pass exams and then go on and do very highbrow degrees. So what I tend to find is learners here are much, much less dynamic to start with. They get there, but they're not quick on the uptake. My experience in international school, you get a different demographic. There's more energy in international schools than there are in independent schools or local independent schools, at least in my experience. The sessions there are a lot more energetic. I suspect the challenge in a state school would be to try and curb that energy. Because my experience, I used to teach in an inner city school in London, and if I were to do this here, it would be amazing, but I imagine it would be much more, the focus for me would be much more on how do we make sure we're able to actually go through the process and keep a lid on it, if you know what I mean. So I think kids would just be blown away by it. I think they'd be amazed by it. But it's just how you use it. And I think as with any good teaching, expectations are key. So for the first session that I run with students, I have a learner etiquette that I share, which basically says, this is what I expect from you if we're going to do this. And I keep coming back to that each session. So they know at the start of a lesson that they must be respectful to other people's ideas. Otherwise, they just won't get the privilege of being involved. They know that if they are in a shared build, for example, they know that they can't discount and move ideas off the table. They know that they only build or contribute when it's their turn. So I have this whole kind of etiquette that people kind of sign off on before they start. In my privileged position now, I don't get people to sign contracts on that. But if I was working in a state school, I used to do learning contracts a lot. You know, this is me. Here's what you can expect from me. Here's what I expect from you. So I probably would do that in a state school. I've got this really exciting process to show you. These are some things I need you to agree upon so that we can do it. Sign that and we'll crack on and then and benefit from it.
And do you think there would be reservations from state schools?
No, I think as soon as I'm really looking forward to going into state schools. I mean, one of the privileges of my recent situation is that I've been able to develop this with lots of resources and lots of support. I feel now that it's developed enough to be used in state schools, and I think it will be amazing. I actually think the most exciting work I will do will be when I bring this to state schools.
I have one challenging question, because dogmatic people would say that this is not Lego Serious Play because it doesn't follow the core process. But why would you say it's still Lego Serious Play?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it does follow the core process. Every single interaction is built on this process of you get a build challenge, you build your response, you share your story, and you reflect. I just like to think I've been creative with what happens in those different stages. The idea, the principles of abstraction and metaphor are absolutely ingrained into the work I do, and the work the students do. The importance that's put on the reflection stage, I think arguably the bringing in of different thinking from my education background, I think adds value. I mean, obviously, I would say that because I'm me, but I think it. You know, the notion of it being open source to me is that it's challenging people to go out there and use it and tackle it and hack it and adapt it to their own context. Otherwise, it wouldn't be open source. It would be a branded thing that they would sell and protect. So for me, if you're not hacking it, why not? Like, I think that's the beauty of Creative Commons license, you know, and the one, you know, when I was putting together some slides for this, the one that I've got a slide at the end. I won't show you because to share will take 20 minutes again. But the current thing I'm doing, I'm playing with this, the 6 bricks idea. So I'm looking at how 6 bricks can be used to do a systems build. I'm finding that really exciting. You know, students providing different meanings to 6 bricks and then identifying how important they are using a kind of model I'm calling the atom. Like, I think that's super exciting. It's Lego Serious Play with 6 bricks. Like, I think it's amazing.
Just another session just on that. I think we're almost running out of time. I think we could go on for another hour. The last question, how can teachers actually learn how to facilitate Lego Serious Play in the school context?
Yeah, I think the training that I did, I think is good training. And I think the books that I've read are good books. I think there's stuff out there. Obviously I would plug mine here at this point on it, but that's shameless. But the book I put together is designed for that, to give people exposure to something that will help them use it in a school context. But I think the most important thing, as I would say to my students when they're doing something as well, is to take a risk and have a go. Like, there is no substitute for experiential learning. Like, if you have a foundational knowledge of it, and a book can give you that, or a training session can give you that, but the only way really that you truly grasp something and can use it and develop it and properly understand it is actually to go ahead and try it out. So when I did my training, someone challenged me to do a session a month. And I think I kind of thought that bar's too low. And I did a session a week, and then I ended up doing 2 sessions a week. And then I was running 3 sessions a week. And actually the value in that is huge. I just think, and they weren't all big sessions. I would get like 5 kids to come in at a lunchtime. I would go to the university counselors and ask if they wanted to try something out. So I would take quite a lot of low stake opportunities to hone my craft, if you like. And now I've got no, I've done enough now that if someone says, will you run a session with 100 kids? I'm like, yeah, great. I was like, if you got the bricks, I'll run the session. It's but that didn't happen overnight. It's a building of confidence through getting a grounding, finding the resources to give you a good grounding, and then just just do it.
Do you think the facilitation training has helped you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have had the grounding without it. And the open source guide is great, but reading it in itself isn't a substitute for actually getting some exposure to seeing how it works. Because it's one of those things that's visceral. When you see it working, you understand its value and its power. If you read about it, it makes sense, but you don't truly get a sense of just how potentially powerful it is. So I think, yeah, doing it yourself, if you find a taster session locally where someone's saying, come and give it a go, that's a great start, I would say.
So talking about reading, I put the Amazon link to the series workbook in the chat window. I can't put the the Amazon link to your book out because I don't have it yet. It's not out. It will be published next week, but I will give you a quick look on it, what it will look like. So where is it? It is somewhere in this feed. So I've opened a LinkedIn window. Just 1 second. Too many windows open here. So this is a quick look of the book cover, Building Better Learning Using the Lego Series Play Method in Education by Liam, to be published next week. I'm looking forward, Liam, to my copy. Liam's, so I've only see a black window. I don't know if Liam's still there. Liam's got a rush, has to go to the next meeting. Let me maybe just at the end put his contact details in the chat window if you want to contact him on LinkedIn. If you want to contact me, these are my contact details.
Just a question about the book. Will you translate it again like the other series works?
Yes, I will. I will do. I don't have my copy yet. I don't have my InDesign files, but I will do it. At the end, as always, let me just give you a quick overview what you're going to expect next time. In the next week, next month, we will do the session in German again. It will be Team Power with Lego Series Play with Jana Fiacola. Will be in German again. And also, if you want to learn Lego Series Play, obviously these are the German dates. Next one is in March in Berlin. We have the advanced systems model training also in Berlin. We have an online training 24th, 25th of April in German. All these trainings except one will be held in German. We have free spaces in Zurich, and we have free spaces in Munich. In Munich, and we will run one training in Berlin in English, 20th to 21st of June. English Lego Series Play facilitator training with me. I will help this training for all interested people in Berlin in English. So if you're there and you want to learn it in English, yes, please feel free to join. Last question by Florian. Florian, I will pass this question on, or maybe you can just email him this question. The question was, can you imagine that Lego Series Play would be beneficial for students with certain learning disorders, limitations? Can be answered later on since time is running away. Yes, it will be answered later. Maybe we can put it somewhere on the CS Work website. Florian, maybe you want to put it there under the book, and I'm sure someone will answer that for you. So we are at the end of the session. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining. And it's been great. Thank you for the contribution. I think we could have gone on for an hour. And I think I will invite Liam to do this again, maybe talk about more experiences. Thank you very much for joining, and I would be great for staying in contact with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Been a great host. Tschüss.
Bye.
Ciao.